Welcome to the fifth episode of the Siege of Antioch. Last time we saw the Crusaders survive the first days of Kerbogha's siege as famine, disease, and constant attacks pushed the army to the brink of collapse. In this episode, the struggle enters its most critical phase. As fighting continues around Antioch's walls, the Crusaders soon learn that no Byzantine relief army is coming. Amid growing despair, the discovery of the Holy Lance transforms morale and convinces many that divine intervention is at hand. With starvation leaving them no choice but to fight, the Crusaders prepare to march out of Antioch and face Kerbogha's army in a battle that will determine not only the fate of the city, but the future of the First Crusade. This is the final chapter of the Siege of Antioch. With Antioch completely surrounded and its supply route to St. Simeon cut off, the Crusaders were effectively isolated from the outside world. During the next 2 weeks, the siege entered a less intense but still dangerous phase, marked by frequent skirmishes rather than large-scale assaults. Several Crusader commanders launched limited attacks against the besieging forces. Godfrey of Bouillon lost around 200 men during an unsuccessful raid outside the Gate of St. Paul. On another occasion, Tancred, described by one contemporary as a knight with an unrelenting desire to fight the Turks, led a small night raid with just 10 men and returned carrying the heads of 6 Muslim soldiers. Individual acts of bravery also featured prominently in the contemporary accounts. During one attack near the Iron Gate, Henry of Esch noticed Muslim troops attempting to scale an undefended tower. Accompanied only by his relatives Franco and Sigmar of Mechelen, he rushed to defend the position and held the attackers long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Henry escaped unharmed, but Franco suffered a serious head wound, while Sigmar was severely wounded in the abdomen. Meanwhile, taking advantage of the temporary reduction in large-scale fighting, the Crusader princes strengthened their defenses on the slopes of Mount Silpius. They constructed a simple stone and mortar wall between their upper camp and the citadel, which was guarded continuously to prevent further attacks. By mid-June 1098, the First Crusade had reached its lowest point. Trapped inside Antioch, the Crusaders faced constant pressure from Kerbogha's army, while famine, disease, and mounting casualties steadily weakened their ability to resist. Morale collapsed, and many believed that defeat was only a matter of time. In these desperate circumstances, many Crusaders placed their hopes in the arrival of the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who had already begun marching east with a relief army. By the middle of June, he had reached Philomelium in central Anatolia and was preparing to continue toward Antioch. Before he could advance further, however, he was met by Stephen of Blois and William of Grandmesnil, who had fled the siege. They reported that Antioch had fallen to the Turks and that the Crusader army had been destroyed. Around the same time, Peter of Alps arrived with reports that a Turkish force was advancing against the emperor's own army. Faced with these reports, Alexios concluded that the crusade had already been lost. Continuing toward Antioch would have exposed his army and the Byzantine Empire to unnecessary risk. After consulting his advisors, he decided to abandon the expedition and withdraw. The emperor's decision would have lasting consequences. When news of his retreat eventually reached Antioch, many Crusaders viewed it as a betrayal, deepening their distrust of the Byzantines. This resentment would later strengthen Bohemond's political ambitions and further damage relations between the Crusaders and the Byzantine Empire. Yet, even as the emperor turned back and conditions inside Antioch grew increasingly desperate, the Crusaders' fortunes began to change. A series of events soon revived their confidence and gave many the conviction that divine intervention was once again on their side. It was under these circumstances that one of the most remarkable and influential episodes of the First Crusade unfolded. At the center of these extraordinary events was Peter Bartholomew, a poor peasant from Provence who had joined the crusade as the servant of a fellow pilgrim, William Peter. Despite his humble background, Peter claimed that he had experienced a series of visions in which St. Andrew revealed the location of one of Christianity's most sacred relics, the Holy Lance, believed to be the spear that pierced Christ's side during the crucifixion. According to Peter, the visions had begun months earlier and continued throughout the crusade. St. Andrew repeatedly instructed him to return to the army and reveal the lance's location, even after Peter had tried to abandon the expedition. Believing that no one would take the word of a poor servant seriously, he kept the visions to himself. On the 10th of June, as the Crusaders' situation became increasingly desperate, Peter finally revealed his story to Raymond of Toulouse and Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy. Adhemar remained skeptical, but Raymond believed the claim deserved further investigation and entrusted Peter to his chaplain, Raymond of Aguilers, who recorded his testimony. Peter's account gained additional importance because it followed other reports of divine intervention, including Stephen of Valence's vision calling on the Crusaders to repent and promising that God would soon come to their aid. Interpreting these visions as connected, Raymond of Toulouse resolved on the 14th of June to search for the Holy Lance. The following morning, Peter led a small group that included Raymond of Toulouse, the Bishop of Orange, and Raymond of Aguilers into the Cathedral of St. Peter. After hours of digging beneath the church floor without success, many present began to lose hope. Finally, Peter entered the excavation himself and produced an iron spearhead, declaring it to be the Holy Lance. News of the discovery spread rapidly through the Crusader camp, inspiring widespread excitement and renewed confidence. Whether the relic was genuine remains impossible to determine. Some contemporaries accepted it as a miracle, while others, including Bishop Adhemar, suspected it was a fraud. Regardless of its authenticity, the discovery transformed morale within the Crusader army. Raymond of Toulouse interpreted it as a sign of divine favor and prepared his men for a final battle rather than surrender. Peter later claimed to receive another vision in which St. Andrew instructed the Crusaders to fast for 5 days before their promised victory, despite the severe famine that already gripped the city. Despite the renewed confidence inspired by the discovery of the Holy Lance, the Crusaders still needed a practical way to break the siege. With Raymond of Toulouse seriously ill, Bohemond assumed overall command of the army. Realizing that Antioch's dwindling supplies could not sustain the Crusaders much longer, he concluded that waiting behind the city's walls was no longer an option. Their best chance of survival was to launch a full-scale attack against Kerbogha's army. At the same time, the Crusader leaders recognized that victory might also depend on exploiting weaknesses within the enemy camp. Although Kerbogha commanded a large coalition, divisions were beginning to emerge among his allies. Rivalries between Muslim rulers, disagreements among the emirs, and growing resentment toward Kerbogha's leadership weakened the unity of his army. As the siege continued, increasing numbers of troops reportedly deserted and returned home. Aware of these internal tensions, the Crusaders made one final attempt to avoid a decisive battle. On the 27th of June, they sent Peter the Hermit and Herluin, a Frank who spoke both Arabic and Persian, to negotiate with Kerbogha. The exact terms they offered are unknown, although later chroniclers mention proposals ranging from peaceful withdrawal to settling the conflict through single combat. Kerbogha rejected all negotiations and demanded the Crusaders' unconditional surrender. The embassy returned without an agreement. Even so, Herluin may have gathered valuable information about the condition of Kerbogha's army, intelligence that could prove useful as the Crusaders prepared for the decisive battle that now seemed unavoidable. With negotiations having failed, the Crusaders had no choice but to fight. Early on the morning of 28th of June 1098, Bohemond organized the army for what would become the decisive Battle of Antioch. The Crusader force was divided into 6 battle formations, each led by one of the expedition's principal commanders. Hugh of Vermandois and Robert of Flanders commanded the 1st Division, Godfrey of Bouillon the 2nd, Robert of Normandy the 3rd, and Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy the 4th, as Raymond of Toulouse was too ill to lead his own troops. The remaining 2 divisions were commanded by Bohemond and Tancred. Meanwhile, around 200 soldiers remained inside Antioch under Raymond's direction to contain the Muslim garrison in the citadel. Before the army marched out, Priests conducted prayers and religious services, while others accompanied the soldiers into battle. Raymond of Aguilers carried the Holy Lance, which many Crusaders regarded as a symbol of divine support. Although months of campaigning had left many knights without their war horses, forcing them to fight on foot or ride inferior animals, morale was high. The Crusaders would soon face their greatest test yet. Kerbogha commanded a larger army composed mainly of cavalry, while the Crusader force had been transformed by months of campaigning and siege. Although they may still have numbered around 20,000 people, this figure included non-combatants, and the fighting force itself was now largely infantry. By June 1098, almost all of the war horses brought from Europe had been lost through disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Only about 200 trained war horses remained, forcing many knights to fight on foot or ride pack animals. Even leading commanders struggled to obtain suitable mounts. Godfrey of Bouillon borrowed a horse from Raymond of Toulouse, while Robert of Flanders reportedly had to raise money to buy one. Before the battle, Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy ordered that every remaining horse be given what little grain was available to keep it strong enough for combat. Despite these hardships, the Crusader army retained an important advantage. Months of continuous fighting had left it with a hardened core of experienced soldiers. Many knights were now forced to fight as heavily armed infantry rather than cavalry, creating a disciplined and resilient force adapted to close combat. Recognizing this transformation, Bohemond adjusted his battle plan to suit the army he had, rather than the one he had begun the crusade with. To deploy his army as quickly as possible, Bohemond devised a carefully planned formation for the Crusaders' advance through the bridge gate. Once the leading force had secured the exit, the remaining divisions marched out one after another before spreading to the left, gradually forming a broad semicircular battle line. The maneuver was not executed with the precision of a professional standing army, but it proved highly effective under the circumstances. It enabled the Crusaders to leave the city rapidly while organizing themselves for battle. Even so, the plan carried considerable risk. Had Kerbogha responded more quickly or attacked while the Crusaders were still emerging from the gate, their army might have been overwhelmed before it had fully deployed. As soon as the bridge gate was opened, the Muslim garrison in Antioch's citadel signaled the Crusaders' advance by raising a black flag, alerting Kerbogha, whose main army was camped several kilometers to the north. He was immediately faced with a crucial decision: attack while the Crusaders were still emerging from the city, or wait until their entire force had deployed before engaging them. Some of Kerbogha's commanders urged an immediate assault, believing the Crusaders were at their most vulnerable. Kerbogha, however, chose to wait. He hoped that by allowing the entire Crusader army to leave the city, he could destroy it in a single decisive battle rather than defeat only its leading divisions. By the time he reconsidered and attempted to open negotiations, it was too late. The Crusaders ignored his offer and continued their advance. Convinced that the coming battle would decide their fate, they marched forward in a deeply religious atmosphere. Priests and monks walked before the army, chanting prayers and calling upon divine assistance as the Crusaders prepared for what they believed would be a holy struggle. Bohemond's choice to lead the Crusaders out through the bridge gate was a deliberate tactical decision. His army's greatest strength lay in close quarters combat, where its heavily armed infantry could engage the enemy directly. A prolonged fight at a distance would have favored Kerbogha's predominantly mounted forces, whose mobility and archery gave them a clear advantage. An advance through Antioch's northern gates would have forced the Crusaders into the narrow Orontes Valley, where they risked becoming trapped between the river and Kerbogha's main army, which was camped near the junction of the Orontes and the Karasu rivers. By choosing the bridge gate instead, Bohemond gave his troops more room to deploy before confronting the enemy, reducing the danger of being overwhelmed as they left the city. According to Albert of Aachen, around 2,000 mounted Turkish archers advanced toward the bridge gate as the Crusaders began to emerge from the city. Anticipating this, Hugh of Vermandois had positioned Crusader archers at the head of the column. Advancing with their shields raised against the incoming arrows, They returned fire and forced the Turkish cavalry to withdraw once they came within range. The retreating horsemen were then pursued by Anselm of Ribemont, followed by Hugh of Vermandois and the northern French contingents, including the forces of Robert of Flanders, Robert of Normandy, Baldwin of Hainault, and Eustace of Boulogne. The fiercest fighting developed on the Crusaders' right flank near the Orontes River, where they engaged a large part of Kerbogha's army. As in earlier battles, the Turks employed their familiar tactic of the feigned retreat, drawing the Crusaders onto more difficult ground before turning to shower them with arrows from a distance. While the main engagement continued near the Orontes River, additional Muslim forces struck the Crusaders from several directions. Troops stationed at the bridge gate were reinforced by soldiers from the Gate of St. Paul and the Gate of the Duke, while another force advanced from the Gate of St. George, threatening the Crusader rear. To prevent encirclement, Reinhard of Toul was sent with a force of northern French and Lotharingian infantry to hold the rear. His men suffered heavy casualties but succeeded in delaying the attack, buying valuable time for the main Crusader force to continue the battle. On the main battlefield, the fighting remained intense. Among the Crusader casualties was Bishop Adamar's standard-bearer, yet the Turkish archers failed to halt the Frankish advance, and Kerbogha's battle line gradually began to give way. During the fighting, many Crusaders claimed to see a vision of mounted saints, St. George, St. Mercury, and St. Demetrius, riding across the hillside with white banners. They interpreted this as a sign of divine support, strengthening their determination. At the same time, Kerbogha's coalition started to disintegrate. Several Muslim emirs, reportedly led by Dukak of Damascus, abandoned the battlefield, fearing that a victory would make Kerbogha too powerful. Their withdrawal spread confusion throughout the army. Kerbogha attempted to slow the Crusader advance by setting fire to the dry grass in front of his lines, but the tactic failed. Only Sokman the Artukid and the Emir of Homs remained loyal until the final stages of the battle. When they too withdrew, Kerbogha accepted defeat and ordered a retreat. The Muslim army soon collapsed into a rout. Following the advice that Peter Bartholomew claimed had come from St. Andrew, the Crusaders ignored the enemy camp and instead pursued the fleeing troops as far as the Iron Bridge, inflicting heavy losses. Others who sought refuge in Tancred's fort were surrounded and killed, while many more were cut down by local Syrian and Armenian inhabitants during their flight. Kerbogha escaped to Mosul with only a small remnant of his army, and the defeat permanently destroyed his military prestige. Although only a portion of Kerbogha's army had been destroyed in the fighting, his defeat effectively ended the threat to the Crusaders. His camp was captured and thoroughly plundered, providing the victors with desperately needed food, animals, weapons, and other supplies after weeks of starvation. Contemporary accounts record that many women were found in the camp. One Latin chronicler noted that the Crusaders did not sexually assault them, but instead killed them. While this statement may seem shocking today, it reflects the attitudes of the time. For many medieval clerical writers, killing enemies in a religious war was considered more acceptable than committing what they regarded as the grave sin of sexual relations with non-Christians. After witnessing Kerbogha's defeat from the citadel, its commander, Ahmed ibn Marwan, recognized that further resistance was futile and offered to surrender. The message was first delivered to Raymond of Toulouse, who ordered one of his banners to be raised over the fortress. Ahmed, however, refused to accept Raymond's banner. According to contemporary accounts, he had already reached a private agreement with Bohemond that would take effect if the Crusaders won the battle. He therefore delayed the surrender until Bohemond arrived in person. The citadel was then peacefully handed over, and its Muslim garrison was allowed to leave unharmed. Some of its members, including Ahmed himself, reportedly converted to Christianity and entered Bohemond's service. The victory over Kerbogha secured Antioch for the Crusaders, but it immediately sparked a dispute over who should control the city. According to the oaths sworn before the crusade, Antioch was to be returned to the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. Bohemond, however, argued that the emperor had broken this agreement by failing to come to the Crusaders' aid after turning back in Anatolia. Most of the Crusader leaders accepted this argument and supported Bohemond's claim, recognizing his leading role in both the capture and defense of the city. Raymond of Toulouse remained the principal opponent, insisting that the original oath should be honored. To resolve the dispute, Hugh of Vermandois and Baldwin of Hainault were sent to inform Emperor Alexios, although Baldwin disappeared after being ambushed on the journey. Alexios made no attempt to recover Antioch, further strengthening Bohemond's position. While Bohemond took control of most of the city and the citadel, Raymond occupied the former palace of Yagi Sian, and rivalry between the two leaders continued. The Crusaders' success was soon overshadowed by new hardships. An epidemic, probably typhus, spread through Antioch, claiming many lives, including Bishop Adhemar of Lipui on the 1st of August, 1098. Food remained scarce, horses were in short supply, and tensions within the army increased. Although the Crusader leaders appealed to Pope Urban II to assume authority over Antioch, he declined. As the months passed, ordinary soldiers grew increasingly impatient. Eager to continue their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, they pressured their leaders to end the dispute. In November 1098, Raymond finally withdrew his opposition for the sake of unity. Early the following year, the main Crusader army resumed its march toward Jerusalem, leaving Bohemond behind as the first prince of Antioch.